Hey, it's Zach again, back for another episode of 20 Minutes of Reading with Zach. Yesterday was the first go with Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life and learned a few things that I should do. So now I have my timer set up on another iPad so that doesn't interrupt and cut the video out like it did. And I have a drink ready this time so I don't have to go run away. And today we're going to be doing the top 5 regrets of the dying by Bronnie Ware. It's a book I've read for a long time, and we're going to be reading chapter, it's called Allow Yourself. So we're going to get started with that. We'll go from there. Allow yourself. As far as work went, looking after Harry was the easiest time I ever had. Not only was he a wonderful person, but his family insisted on doing everything. 3 of Harry's 5 daughters lived in the same suburb and would bring his main meals over most days, and one of his sons insisted on caring for his dad himself. Questioning the need for me to be there at all, the daughters and other sons assured me they definitely wanted me there. It meant, however, that much of my time was spent reading or writing. There's only so much housework to be done in an already clean and tidy home, with its only tenant bedridden. I did create a couple of delicious soup recipes in his kitchen, though. Harry had bushy eyebrows, hairy ears, a red face, and an honest laugh. We liked each other immediately. Within the first minute of meeting, we had both cracked a joke with each other, so it was an easy, natural association from the start. His son Brian was a different story, though. He was highly strung. Harry and Brian had fallen out years ago, and while contact had remained between them, their bond was never quite the same. The rest of the family explained it as being Brian's fault. I wasn't there all those years ago, nor had I walked in either Harry or Brian's shoes, so I don't know. It didn't matter to me either way. But it was obvious that Brian was now trying to make up for lost time by insisting he had to be his father's primary carer. Brian interrupted any attempt I had made to help Harry. By now, I was very good at finding the right position for a client's comfort. It was an intuitive thing, and one of many clients commented on. But family often rearrange pillows and supports out of kindness, not realizing how sensitive a person's body is at this time, and how the slightest adjustment can undo only the tiny bit of comfort they have. When his son reluctantly went off to work every day for a few hours, the first thing I would do would get Harry comfortable again. If there was a tiny moment of time during the day when I could attend to him without being hounded by his son, literally the first thing Harry would ask for me to quickly adjust was his pillows. Each afternoon, we had those few hours together before the family arrived back en masse for dinner, even though by now their dad was hardly eating. These hours were wonderful, and what Harry had affectionately called the peace hours. While I tended to his physical needs, we would chat and laugh. This was usually followed by a cup of tea and some more chat. Harry had lost his wife 20 years earlier, but had come to continuing his life well. He had enjoyed his work, though became even busier on retiring, joining a couple of sporting and social clubs. While his illness was terminal, prior to this, he had experienced amazing health for his whole life. I respected the gift of health I was given, Harry told me, by staying active and believing some quota of years saying I would be acting this way or that. People make themselves old before their time, you know. Despite being a dying person, Harry was the healthiest man of 80 years I had ever seen. The illness was certainly starting to wear him down, but evidence of his prior fitness was still apparent. Massaging his legs, for example, muscle tone from all his walking could still be seen. When you're retired and your children are raising their own children, the need for friends is even more important, Harry said. So when my wife died, God rest her soul, I joined the rowing club. Then I joined a bushwalking club. I don't know how I ever had time to work. Harry very much believed in the importance of extended family, that grandparents are an integral part of their children's lives and should be given plenty of opportunity to spend time with them. It was obvious in his relationships with his grandchildren, who visit him daily, that he had a very positive and loving influence on them all. My family comes first, but you need people your own age too. If it weren't for the friends I've made through the clubs, I would have been a very lonely old person. I wouldn't have been lonely for company, as I have had my children and grandchildren, but lonely for like-minded company of people my own age. Hours were spent chatting in his room until the late afternoon sun would warn us of the peace hours almost being over. The family would soon be descending on us again, but Harry always talked for as long as he could. He said he didn't understand why people left it too late to realize the importance of friends. Also, while it was beautiful when elderly people still managed to hold a loving and respected position within their family, he grew frustrated that so many of them hadn't left time for friendship along the way too. They'll realize it too late, he insisted. But it's not just my generation. I look at the younger ones as well, who get so caught up and busy, not taking just a little bit of time out for themselves now and then to do things that make them happy on an individual basis. They lose who they really are completely, and little time with friends reminds them of who they were when they are not mom, dad, grandma, or grandfather. Do you understand what I'm saying? Agreeing that I'd only seen plenty of people go down that road, I had also seen others who had maintained just a slight bit of time out for themselves and were much happier people. They were also much better company to be around. Exactly, he laughed, slapping the bed in agreement. Good friendships stimulate us. The beauty of friendship is that these people take us as we are, on the things we have in common. Friendship is being accepted as who you are, not as who someone else wants you to be, like a partner or family. We must maintain our friendships, my dear girl. By the stream of visitors that came to visit Harry regularly, it was obvious this man had walked the talk. His friends were all happy, jovial, and brought great joy with them. Equally respectful of his illness, though, they accepted that sometimes he was resting and could not be disturbed. On another afternoon, Harry asked me about my own friendships, so I filled him in on my close friends and explained how some of my other friendships were changing lately, as was I. Well, that's natural too, he said. Friends will come and go throughout your life, and that's what we should value them while they are still here. Sometimes you simply finish learning or sharing what you were meant to through each other. But others will stay the distance, and that history and understanding is a comforting thing when you're at the end of the road. During these talks, we both agreed that women approach friendships much differently than men. Women value friendships in a stronger way emotionally. That is, the friendships grow closer with a talk about emotional things. Men need friendships for talking too, he said, but they do this best when they are doing things together, like playing tennis, cycling, or doing something active. Men enjoy friendships where they can work things out, resolve problems, whether physical or emotional, and this often happens best when they are active. Like building a fence around a paddock together, I suggested. Harry cracked up laughing. My, you can take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the girl. Yes, a very rural example, Bronnie, but exactly. Building a fence or doing something manual together is a bonding thing for men. He carried on laughing and said if I ever wanted to bond with a good-looking man, all I had to do was help him to build a fence. I told him I keep it in mind. Sharing some of his favorite stories about the mateship with me, Harry reinforced the blessings of the friendship still existing every day. Lovely friends visited him. They were now operating a roster amongst themselves, though, so as to not exhaust him. This way, everyone still had a chance to spend time with Harry. It was loyal and wonderful. We both admitted that through these peace hours, we were each receiving a new friendship into our lives too, each other. It frustrated him, he said, to know that I was in another part of the house for the rest of the day, just reading or writing, when I could be in his room chatting. In total agreement, I laughed, but he understood, as did I. Brian's need to make amends and the desire to assist his father. Harry didn't want Brian to be carrying any guilt, though he was sure he still would, unfortunately. So he was happy to go with it, and allow his son to feel needed during their last weeks together. Even if he can't arrange the pillows well, he sighed. Harry was philosophical about his illness and what was to come. He had lived his life to the fullest, he said, and was ready to see what lay beyond. While we did speak about his approaching passing sometimes, he still steered many of the conversations to the subject of friends, the memories and the value of them. Sorry. And the necessity of them for happiness and acceptance. He also encouraged me to share some of my favorite memories with him about my friendship so far. Start with one from your childhood. Let's hear where you're coming from, he said, then laughed in delight when my story began in a rural setting, a paddock of wheat. By the time I was 12, we had moved from a cattle lucerne growing farm to a sheep and wheat farm. It was miles from town, under a magnificently huge sky. About a year later, my first dog disappeared suddenly when she was 7. We think it may have been a snake's bite, as we never found her. This wasn't surprising, as the farm was so large. It was devastating for me, though. A few months later, my folks bought me a new dog. She was a little white Maltese terrier who neglected to realize that she was supposed to be a house dog. Instead, she spent her days chasing the sheepdogs, the border collies, and kelpies over paddocks near and far. My close friend throughout my high school years, and for a long time after, was Fiona. Although she lived in town, much of our time was spent out at the farm. I stayed in town at her parents' place a bit too, particularly as we grew a little older there and there were boys to be kissed. One of the main things that linked Fiona and me over the years, though, was our love of walking. I cannot think of how many miles we ended up walking together over the decades of our friendship. Beaches, rainforests, city streets, foreign countries, bush tracks, you name it. It all started with walking those paddocks of wheat. As usual, my dog and a couple of the other dogs came along with us. It was not particularly strange to turn around and see a cat or two also following. While we girls stuck to the track that led to the furthest paddocks away, the dogs would run through the wheat. This was fine while the wheat was low, but as it grew, my little dog became invisible. Fiona and I were given the most beautiful comedy sketch this day. Following the big dogs, which we could see clearly above the tallest sections of the crop, was a trail of movement in the wheat behind my little dog ran blindly after the big dogs. Then, every now and then, the movement would stop. A little white head would pop up and look around like a submarine telescope coming out of the water until it spotted the other dogs, and then it disappeared below again into the wheat, blazing another trail of movement in the new direction. Then the movement would stop. Up would pop up the little white head, spot the target again, disappear below, and run on. This went on for ages, and by the end of it, every time we saw the little white head pop up and look around, Fiona and I would break into a hysterical teenage giggling all over again. Our cheeks ached from the laughing, and as tears ran down our faces, we leaned on each other, holding the top up before spotting the dog popping up yet again, and doubling over in laughter even more. In the end, we could hardly even stand up. Sharing this simple but precious memory took me back to the value of friendship in an instant. Harry and I laughed together, and I miss that innocence of youth and the carefree, uninhibited laughter I used to share with Fiona. "Where is she now?" Harry asked. I went on to explain that she was living in another country and we had lost touch. Life had moved on, I said, and there were also now others in my life whom I was closer to. Other factors had also affected our friendship. Other people, yes, but also other tastes and gradual differences in lifestyle. Harry agreed that you can't go back, but maybe life would bring our paths around again. Having already observed many cycles in life, I agreed it was possible. But either way, it didn't matter. I valued the memories and wished Fiona well, silently thanking her for the learning and friendship we had once shared. Many of my best memories of friendships were of walking, talking, and laughing. Over the next week or two, I shared with Harry stories from some of the other friendships. He had also been a keen walker and shared some of his own with me, of places he'd walked and of friends with whom he had shared the experiences with. I could imagine any group being brightened by Harry's laughter as they walked. It made me smile at the thought, and when he asked what I was smiling at, I was happy to tell him. Harry agreed that they had always shared some great laughs while walking. As it was, I was to leave Harry the following week to go on a long walk myself. I hadn't been sure if he would still be alive when I had booked into it. So while I was looking very forward to getting out of the city, I was also a little sad to be leaving him, not sure if he would still be here when I returned. When I told Harry what I was doing, though, he wholeheartedly agreed with enthusiasm that he said he would be there with me in spirit, whether he was alive or not. The walk was in a remote area and was held each year, although ending at the same lake. Each time a different tributary was followed. This particular year, it was starting on some farms where the very mouth of a river began. We would follow that river, and much of it now just dry riverbeds, and eventually end up at the lake. The concept of the walk was to give the participants the opportunity to heal with the earth as we walked the paths trodden by ancient civilizations. Rivers were like highways then, thoroughfares at least, where tribes would live and walk along its banks from one place to the next. An Aboriginal elder blessed us as we all partook in a cleansing smoke ceremony, then off we went, walking for 6 days. We all fell into our own rhythm. There were about a dozen of us. Some walked in groups and talked all the way. Others meandered in and out of conversation. Some stopped and took photos of everything, and some of us walked more alone. Each night, a couple of volunteers would turn up the trailer, carrying out grate and we'd establish camp. Then around a peaceful campfire, a communal dinner was prepared, while beautiful friendships formed under a magnificent blanket of stars. With every footstep, the connection with the earth increased. While I enjoyed conversations, when we stopped for a break, I found more enjoyment in walking alone, and my pace ensured this anyway. Having done so much walking in the past, my natural rhythm carried me ahead of the main group. One other walker, a wise and loving soul who originally started those walks, was always ahead of me, also walking to his own river. The time alone was just walking, and walking was also great for finding clarity within myself again. During this time, I realized and didn't want to keep house sitting for much longer. Something in me was starting to think about having my own kitchen again. All of the moving I had once loved was starting to exhaust me. A new seed was planted, not with big fanfare, just a quiet acceptance within that some things were changing. I walked on peacefully. It is rare to be able to walk so far in modern times, as land is now separated by ownership. Thankfully, this was all approved of beforehand, so we walked across farm after farm without any problem. In the modern rush of life, it is very easy not to be aware of the earth beneath our feet. Sure, most of us feel a connection with the earth when we stop and absorb the beauty of nature. To be able to walk for 6 days unhindered, though, left me feeling a connection with the earth I hadn't known was missing, despite all of my time previously spent in blissful appreciation of the planet. Along the way, we discovered carvings from ancient people and marveled at magnificent red gums, trees hundreds of years old. There were intricate carvings as well as indentations where canoes had been crafted from their bark. This evidence of a past people whose tribes were now long lost was heartbreaking and inspiring at the same time. The energy in certain places was incredibly strong too, and I understood why it was a walk intended for healing. On top of this, much of the farmland we crossed reminded me of where I had grown up. Even the smell of the sheep poo brought a flood of memories rushing back, and I loved being in the dry, dusty climate again, even if only temporarily. With every footstep, my fitness improved, and I dreamed of returning to a world where walking was the main means of transport. It just made more sense to me rather than all of the rush and bustle of modern life. Finding a cooling water hole to swim in was a welcome relief one day when I had somehow lost the group briefly. Stripping off and swimming in this clean, refreshing water was rejuvenating, as the water cleansed my spirit as much as it did my body. Every moment of this week was a spiritual blessing, and the connection with nature grew more enhanced. The landscape changed constantly as we walked about 8 in the morning until 5 or so each afternoon, then set up camp. Other signs of previous life dotted our path as well. An old cart that had once become bogged in the river was now part of the dry landscape and possibly had been for over 100 years. A stone cabin with no roof told of river dwellers in other times too. The best, though, was when we saw the carvings and realized what a unique history lesson we were all blessed with, confirming the lives of those ancient people whose footsteps we were now following. After 6 full days of walking and about 80 kilometers covered, we arrived weary but exhilarated. It was with great sadness that I said farewell to the other walkers, but with even greater sadness that the walk had finished. The following day, I walked for another 5 hours around the dry lake itself, as I just couldn't get out of the walking mode. A small music festival followed a few days later, which was organized with equal reverence as the walk, so I hung around for that and then headed back to Melbourne. Thankfully, Harry had not yet passed, so I was able to spend a little more time with him. During the 10 days I was away, though, the disease had taken over his body, and I found him looking quite emaciated. All of his tone had left his once muscular legs, and his big round face was now gaunt with loose skin. Yet he was still Harry, still a delightful, beautiful man. The intensity of Brian's desperation to look after his father had increased enormously. He was even more controlling than ever and would only leave the house for an hour maximum each afternoon. I was grateful that both Harry and I had already appreciated those peace hours before I went away, as they were hardly on offer now. In addition to Brian's obsessive behavior, Harry was sleeping much more anyway. As life would have it, though, Brian was called away unexpectedly one morning and had to reluctantly hand the care over to me. And it was when Harry was at his brightest. Not that his brightest was bright anymore, but he was awake and capable at talking at least. At his request, I told him all about the walk and the insights I had into myself while I was away. He asked about the other walkers as well, of any positive changes they'd noticed in themselves or that I had noticed. There was much to share. "And what are you doing this week in regards to friends, Bronnie?" he inquired in his weakening voice. "What time are you giving your week to spend with good quality friends? That's what I want to know." I laughed at his persistence on the subject and said there would be plenty of time to catch up with other friends later. Right now, I wanted to enjoy my time with him, Harry, who was also my friend. "It's not enough, my dear girl. You are doing what others do. Surely you have learned by now that you must take time out for you too. Find some balance and make time for your friends regularly. Do it for yourself, even more for them. We need our friends." Harry looked at me sternly with a look of warning, but we both knew there was love behind his insistence. He was right. I needed to maintain some time out with friends regularly, rather than working all of these 12-hour shifts and catching up with them later. As much as I loved this work and sometimes shared some wonderful laughter with the clients and their families, it was a pretty serious world I was living in. Being around dying people and the sadness of their families needed to be balanced with some lightness that only friends could provide. Joy was missing from my life, and it was now only that I was able to truly acknowledge this to myself. "You're right, Harry," I admitted. He smiled and put his arms up for a hug. I leant down on the bed and embraced him, smiling. "It's not just about staying in touch with your friends, my dear girl. It's about just giving yourself the gift of their company too. You understand this, don't you?" He asked with both words and eyes. Nodding with conviction, I replied, "Yes, Harry, I do," leaving him to his rest a little, while later I appreciated the point he had made and the direct honesty shared. Harry was blessed with a smooth passing. He died in his sleep a few nights later. Calling to let me know, his daughter thanked me sincerely, but I said to her, "Harry gave a lot to me too. It had been my pleasure to know him." "Allow yourself time with your friends," I still hear him say. The words of that dear man with the bushy eyebrows, red face, and big smile live on still. It's a great book. Top 5 regrets of the dying, a life transformed by the dearly departing by Bronnie Ware. Put the link in the bio. Hope you stick around to the end, and thanks again.